Following the major upgrading of port facilities in Botany Bay, shipping movement in and out of the port has increased considerably over the years. Every day of the year, vessels are escorted safely through the heads under the watchful eyes of local pilots, mostly unaware that their course takes them directly over the resting place of the Woniora. In 1863, the Bulli Coal Company shipped their first load of coal from their newly completed jetty at Sandon Point, Bulli. In that same year, the new collier, Woniora, arrived from the shipbuilding yards in the UK, making her one of the first purpose-built colliers to operate in New South Wales waters. Over the next 15 years, the company purchased another 3 colliers, and at its height there were over 400 employees maintaining the company profile in the Illawarra. For 19 years, the Woniora was a common sight on the waters south of Sydney, making 4 return journeys a week between Sandon Point and Sydney. On the afternoon of Saturday, October 28, 1882, the Woniora lay berthed at the Sandon Point jetty, as another routine shipment of coal was loaded in her bunkers. Strong winds and a heavy southeast swell made the task difficult and shunted the ship against the wharf. It was routine practice to reduce the cargo by 16 tonnes in the event of bad weather. However, on this occasion, Captain Henry Lauridsen allowed the holds to be filled to capacity. At 4 p.m. that day, the ship cast off. Destination was Sydney Harbour. The collier had a crew of 16 on board, some having served on the vessel for 10 years or more. In contrast to these was able seaman Heinrich Friedrichsen. He had only joined the ship 12 days earlier. As the afternoon turned into evening, the weather conditions deteriorated. Friedrichsen described them as the worst he had ever seen on the Australian coast. By 9 p.m, the Woniora had reached a point abeam of the south headland of Botany Bay. Friedrichsen had sought shelter in the forecastle head when he felt the ship start to roll. With the others, he had made his way onto the deck, to be met by the voice of the captain shouting orders at the helmsman. But it was too late. The ship rolled over onto her beam's end. Those lucky enough to be on deck were thrown into the water. The crew still below went down with the ship. Anything floating was seized in the desperate struggle to survive. Friedrichsen found a plank and, pulling himself up, rested until he came upon an upturned lifeboat. An unidentified seaman was desperately clawing at the side of the hull, but the huge seas kept sweeping him off. The terrified man grasped hold of Friedrichsen and began to pull him under. In a remarkably frank admission, Friedrichsen would later state during the Court of Marine Inquiry, "He clung to me, but I shook him off. I did not see him again." With the plank under both arms, he maintained his grip on the boat, and shortly after, the boat righted itself. Climbing aboard, he lashed the plank across the stern of the vessel to make a short outrigger. Then, through the pouring rain, he recognised a headland. In a miraculous stroke of good fortune, the boat was swept into the protection of Botany Bay. 5 hours after the Woniora foundered, the lifeboat grounded on the shoreline at Kurnell, close to where Lieutenant James Cook had alighted just over 110 years before. Heinrich Friedrichsen was the only survivor of the collier Woniora. Fishermen discovered the whereabouts of the wreck off Botany Bay in about the 1940s, but it would be 1987 before divers confirmed the remains were that of the Woniora. In superb visibility, divers descend to their very small aft section, the only part of the ship that remains reasonably intact. Lying upright, in a maximum depth of 64 metres, the wreck remains a monument to that night almost 130 years ago. A front view of the boiler reveals a massive crack around the top perimeter. A diver inspects the vent at the top of the boiler, once used to exhaust the gases via the ship's funnel. Like most of the wrecks of this vintage, the ship's counterstern has fallen off. Only one of the Woniora's propeller blades remains visible above the sand, the surface covered in a mosaic of colour. The vessel's engine is possibly its most significant feature. The collier was powered by what was termed as a simple inverted marine engine, a product of the 1860s. These were the first modern, efficient steam engines which could run at high revolutions without vibration problems. 16 other simple engine types are known to have been fitted to New South Wales vessels, but only the Lady Darling, located on the New South Wales south coast, has been found. The Woniora's deadly cargo, coal from the Illawarra escarpment. The coal from the southern fields was preferred by the major steamship companies. Proudly declaring in company advertising at the time, they stated the deficiency of volatile hydrocarbons made the coal burn absolutely smoke-free, thus prolonging the time between services to the boiler. Often, swept by strong currents, the wreck is covered in multicoloured soft corals, making her unique to any other shipwreck in the Sydney area. A view forward of the boiler shows the protruding remains of the hull, just centimetres above the sand. Just in front of the boiler, a spare anchor lays partially buried in the sand. While further forward, the battered remains of the ship's donkey boiler show signs of collapsing after more than a century beneath the sea. It was used for the discharge of cargo. It once stood directly behind the open bridge.
When I decided to make a series on the wrecks of New South Wales back in 2005, I chose 7 wrecks as my main subjects. The Woniora was one of them. My initial thought was that this wreck would be the hardest to achieve clear footage of because of its position near Botany Bay. However, it wasn't so. We were blessed with some really clear water on several dives and reasonable clarity on others. Years before, my dive partner at the time, May Elliott, and I journeyed out from Botany Bay on my 5-metre Quintrex. In May 1987, we met up with a 35-foot fishing vessel by the name of the Flare outside the Heads. I ran my sounder over the fishing boat's position, and up came the long-lost wreck of the Woniora. We dived her for the first time a few weeks later. This is the actual picture of that dive. No helium or oxygen, no computers. So-called technical diving with mixed gases was still a number of years away in Australia at the time. In the next few years, a small group of Sydney wreck divers would venture to even deeper wrecks on air. HMAS Encounter, 74 metres, and the paddle tug Kopatai, 78 metres. Absolute madness by today's standard, but that's just the way it was.
The Marine Board handed down its decision regarding the loss of the ship, stating that the Woniora was too deeply loaded and probably driven too fast to contend with the exceptional weather. They placed the blame on the captain, as he had held discretionary powers in loading her.